Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. I don't think we would have so many people coming to a workshop on community planning on a Sunday morning in England, so which is very, very impressive. It's really exciting for me to have this opportunity to come and share the experience with you, and for that I thank the Urban Regeneration Office and Cosmos very much indeed. What I'm going to do in this session is present a simple framework for addressing community involvement in planning, provide a taster of some of the options available, look at how one can develop a community involvement strategy for any particular situation, look at a few case studies, and reflect on the implications for Taiwan. As I know that a lot of you have had a lot of experience in this field, I'm going to go through the first section of the presentation fairly quickly, but I'm sure it will be available for you if you want to catch up on it later. Now, first of all, the obvious question, why involve people in planning? And these are some of the reasons. I'm not going to go through them now again because you're obviously very familiar with these, but I think it's worth making the point that 17 years ago, these things weren't taken for granted, and one had to argue the case for why people should be involved in planning. Now things have changed a great deal, and these are widely accepted in most parts of the world now that people need to be involved in the planning process. So that is, in a sense, a big step forward. A simple definition of community planning. Planning carried out with the active participation of the end users. So it's similar in that sense to community architecture, community design, and so on. And the key phrase is active participation. This is not about consulting, it's about active participation. Now, as some of you in this room will know, I came to this field in the first place as a community activist and then as a journalist, and I wrote a book with a colleague of mine who was a journalist on the Times called Community Architecture. This present sort of phase of work, that really initiated me into that process, and what then happened was that people said to me, well, it's no good just writing about it, you've got to do it. So I found myself beginning to do it. And I got involved in action research program based initially at the Prince of Wales Institute of Architecture, and we wanted to find out what was working and what wasn't working, and so we set up projects and we monitored them, and then we wrote about them, and on the basis of that wrote good practice guidance. And the first product was this book, Action Planning. The second product was in 2000, a book called the Community Planning Handbook. The Action Planning was then revised as the Community Planning Event Manual in 2008, change of name. And all this work was supported by a range of different organisations and a range of different research projects. Some of these are listed here. The Academy of Urbanism, the Department for International Development in the UK, the Department of Environment, Transport and the Regions in the UK, English Partnerships, which is a kind of quango which deals with property, a government-funded property organisation in the UK, the new John Thompson and Partners, a very prominent consultancy, Prince's Foundation. So it was interesting that this work was being supported by both government organisations and charitable organisations and academic institutes. And you'll be interested to know that we are in the process of revising the Community Planning Handbook for publication next year. That won't probably won't have the same cover, but actually the publishers had to grant me an extension as a result of me coming on this trip to Taiwan. But that is good because it means I can include some of the experience from Taiwan in this next edition of the book. So one can see that it's a kind of evolution of good practice. In the meantime, we produced this website, which now underpins the books in a way and is a kind of up-to-date resource. It's Google's #1 of many million results for community planning. It has over 1,000 visitors per week. It has users from 100 countries most months. And it was interesting, it was featured in a study by the UN Habitat as a good practice toolkit for urban governance. So the website kind of is in a sense our kind of main current interest, but the handbooks can then be published periodically and revised according to the information that is then on the website. The website was launched in 2001 and, like all websites, has evolved since. Now, I think what's interesting about this is when we first started work on community architecture, people, certainly it was very provincial in terms of the work I was involved with. People thought we were just dealing with a phenomenon in England or in the UK. And it's increasingly clear that the same processes are going on all over the world, and that in a sense it has universal applicability. And so it seems to be an operating system that seems to work. Just very quickly, Chinese edition of action planning, 1996, German in 1997, Czech in 1999, French in 2010. And these were adaptations. In all cases they were an adaptation, but they used the same basic operating system. The handbook was published in Chinese in 2002 and in Korean in 2008. So what is that operating system? The results of that kind of action research program were that one can best look at community planning by considering it in 3 different ways. First of all, there are principles which apply to almost any situation and have worldwide applicability. Secondly, one can look at it in terms of methods. A huge menu of different techniques and approaches, new ways of people interacting, new types of event, and new support frameworks. And then thirdly, one can look at it in terms of scenarios. How one might use a combination of methods in a particular development situation, whether it be inner city regeneration, village improvement, creating a neighbourhood plan or a community centre, whatever it is. So these are different from scenarios are different from case studies, as we'll see later, but they're a kind of interesting way of looking at things because they're a way that things might happen and can happen rather than have happened. So what I want to do now is to run through some in each of these 3 main categories, just so to give you a taster of how that works. First of all, principles, universally applicable good practice. Involve all sections of the community. People of different ages, gender, backgrounds and culture invariably have different perspectives. So it's important to make sure that a full spectrum of the community is involved. Now, this is usually more important than involving large numbers per se, although that doesn't mean that you shouldn't involve large numbers. Here you see a photograph of, sorry, I'm pressing the wrong one now. Some children in Hastings, in the Ore Valley, involved in an action planning event. And in the right-hand picture, you see some elderly people in Pakistan working on a plan for their village. Principle, work on location. Wherever possible, base community planning activities physically in the area being planned. This makes it much easier for everyone to bridge the gap between concept and reality. And again, you'll see photograph from Hastings where some residents are planning the future of a rundown graveyard on the left, and on the right some people in Kenya making a plan for their water system. Again, you can see the point of these photographs is that the same principles apply in developed countries and developing countries. Visualize. People can participate much more effectively if information is presented visually rather than in words. So the use of graphics, maps, illustrations, cartoons, etc. It always is better than long, lengthy, wordy reports. These two pictures were a before and after, which is a very effective way of explaining development proposals. This was the result of a before and after a planning weekend in Prague, the Wenceslas Square in Prague. And it's very clear, even by just looking at those photographs now, one can get an idea of what is being proposed, very simply. And most people can understand this kind of language. So that's just 3 principles. There are about 50 principles now listed on the website, and I'm quite sure there will be more being generated every moment. So methods, how do you go about it in practice? Interactive displays. People engaging in the issues and debates on their own and in an enjoyable way by making additions or alterations to pre-prepared exhibits. Here we see sticky dots where people put red and green sticky dots on a map to indicate spaces and buildings they like and spaces and buildings they don't like. Post-it boards, a very classic way where you just simply ask a question and then get people to respond. And in the third one at the bottom, you've got an elevation of either side of a shopping street, and people being asked to make comments about how they think that shopping street could be improved. The interesting thing is, but even within those photographs, you can see that this is engaging people in conversation. People are enjoying doing it, and they start thinking about things and start engaging with each other about those issues. Street stalls. Taking participation out into the streets, making it possible to secure the views of larger numbers of people than is possible indoors. Particularly useful where the views of people using a particular street or public space are wanted. This particular photograph was taken in Bath, where we wanted to find out the views of people who were shopping, on views about the shopping spaces in the Bath. And in a period of just a few hours, one could get huge numbers of people making comments and beginning to engage in the debate. And this is particularly good in terms of overcoming people's resistance to attending events, which is something that I think we all find. It's quite difficult to get people to come into a particular building to have a meeting or whatever it is, whereas if you go out to where they are and engage with them, that makes it much easier for them. Reconnaissance trips. The inspection of the environment being dealt with by mixed teams of local people and technical experts. Used to familiarise everyone with the physical environment and key issues at the start of a project and to review progress at intervals. In a way, it's strange that one has to include this as a method because it would seem to be a completely obvious thing to do. But in a great many projects, you find that the professionals never actually engage with the people that are living in the places that they're designing.